Hi, Cheryl, and hi, Joanne. Thank you, Joanne, for helping us out.
All right, we are live streaming. I'm going to give you back host, Brad.
Super, thank you. Welcome, everybody, to 6 questions every author should ask before they publish a book.
All right, have a great class, Russ.
Thanks
Russ.
a lot, Megan. Hi, Todd. How are you?
I'm your TA. Can you please make me a co-host?
I sure will. Joanne, you learned fast. You did very well. See, you're now part expert in Zoom. Cheryl, have you had one of my classes before?
Yes, yes, I listened to, I'm the one that was not the traveler, but I listened to all your stuff.
Great.
Oh, yes, a lot of, you do, great job.
Thanks. Your name was familiar.
Yeah.
I always say that I'm great with faces, but I'm terrible with names. But I do actually remember a lot of names, believe it or not. I should say, believe it or not, to me. You may not matter to you, but it matters to me. So we just, Joanne, you were in the last class, weren't you, where we talked about mobile apps? Yep, that's what I thought. Well, we'll give ourselves a few more minutes to see if a couple more people join. They always come in during the first 5 minutes. And then later tonight, we have Foodie Wednesdays, 7:30 p.m. More Rick Steves. Cheryl Ann, did you see Rick Steves last night?
Yes, I did.
Wasn't he great?
He is. Even though I'm not a traveler anymore, I love his philosophy. And when he talked about art and history, you need to know the world to understand. And so, yes, it was good.
That was really good. I love his philosophy too. That's why I follow his stuff and have his guidebooks and read his blog and all the things, and why I enjoy doing his videos in our classes in the evenings this month.
I didn't know anything about him. So and then I started following him after doing a Get Set Up with You. And so I will listen to him. I like his take a lot.
So are either of you thinking about publishing a book?
No, I don't know. I don't even think so. I don't know.
Okay.
I love to read, and my friend is always saying, you need to write. I love biographies, autobiographies. She said, you have quite the story. And I do believe that that's so, but, and the odd thing is after I retired from public school and after 35 years, and I went and taught at a community college writing. But I don't write myself. So I don't know. I just, that is in my mind. That's why I signed up for this class. So,
well, there's another class I do. I'm not sure. I think it's scheduled for next week, called Everyone Has a Story to Tell, which is about how to start a memoir. Because often a lot of people just are like, I don't know where to start. And I give them some tips on how to start and then just go from there. So it's easy. It's easier than you think.
Yeah. Well, I do agree with my friend. My life has been very different, interesting, and there is a lot to it, as many people are. But I enjoy. It's almost like I enjoy reading so much. I just can't see myself the writing, but I think I have the ability to write. I don't know. So,
well, good.
So,
welcome, Mary Lou. Nice to have you. Now, Cheryl, where are you from?
Michigan.
And yeah. Joanne, I should remember. Hang on. It's Horseshoe Bay, Texas.
Yes.
An unusual name of a place, and it is not on the Gulf Coast, lest you think it is.
It's a resort. There's 5 golf courses. The average age is in the 70s.
Okay.
A place to
And-
retire.
Well, yes. Well, welcome, Mary Lou. I'm going to ask, this is a small class today. Feel free to ask questions anytime during my presentation. I don't think you have to worry about putting your question in the chat. You can. You're certainly welcome to put your question in the chat, and I'll come around to it later, because sometimes people are like, I don't want to interrupt right now. I just had a question. We'll pose it for later. So you should see something that says 6 questions every author should ask.
Yes. Yep.
And before publishing a book, I developed this class off a methodology that I've used with authors over recent years, but gleaned from my years as a book publisher. Editors usually worked with authors on these questions, and so I was quite familiar with it. And as I started working, consulting with authors who wanted to self-publish or publish with a regular publisher, they would often come to me with a manuscript, and I'd say, well, there's some questions you need to ask before we go any further. So that's what as the origin of this. I am your guide, Russ Eanes, from Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist, and I formerly was a book publisher, and I love to help authors shape their ideas into a book. So that's where a lot of this material is from. And I love the energy I get and the wisdom I collect working with older adults. Love working with Get Set Up. I'm now a full-time guide with Get Set Up, specializing in travel, but I do other things as well because I have a wide range of things I enjoy teaching. As we all know, Get Set Up helps you learn useful skills from people like you so you can do wonderful things. We learn from each other. Ideally, we can see you and your cameras are on. And you can request a recording of this after class. You email help@getsetup.io. If anyone is joining by live stream, and this is being live streamed today, the best way to participate is to join us and register for a class. Then you can ask questions live. And by the way, Get Set Up's not paid to promote any specific products, so I'm not sure I'm going to promote anything today, but in case I do, that wasn't the intention. Our agenda today is to help a budding or would-be author with some basic concepts that they should consider before they publish a book. And it's created, I do this in the form of 6 questions to help give you things to think about. And by the way, I'll send you these 6 questions at the end. So in case you forget one of them or didn't think you got it written down in time, you will have it all delivered to your email. The first question, what I always ask an author is, well, what is it you're writing? Which is genre. Is it work of fiction, or a memoir, or a self-help guide, or is it poetry, or photography, recipe, cookbook, life story? All those things are genre. And you really have to think through what that genre is. Sometimes a book you are writing might span a couple of genres. So when I self-published my book, The Walk of a Lifetime, it actually is combination travel writing and memoir. So it's more than one. And no one fixed genres. They're not like, there's 100 of them and you can't have another one. They were determined 100 years ago. No, genres are created all the time, depending on what authors want to write. However, knowing the type of genre is very important when you are determining a lot of things about your book. So for example, it helps you determine what kind of models you want to make, what things you want to copy your book after. So I wrote a book about walking the Camino de Santiago, and I read lots of other books about walking the Camino de Santiago and try to see if there are any that I wanted my book to be like or different from. If you're doing a cookbook, you may want to review lots of different cookbooks because they're all different. Some are more photos, some are big on ingredients. You really have to spend time with it, knowing what you want to do. But even sometimes there's practical matters. So for example, I'm working with somebody, and that's a picture here on the right. It's a river guide, and it's printed on waterproof paper. Of course, it's a kayaking guide for the river, and you're likely to drop it in the river. So it's got to be done on waterproof paper. So just since you know what you have to think about what it is you're writing, because it will impact some things. Or for example, a cookbook has photos and is printed on glossy paper. That's because you really, if you're doing a cookbook, to have beautiful pictures of your food helps other people's mouths water, but also helps them think, oh, I want to cook that. And if you want to do color photos, especially of food, you want glossy paper so that the colors pop out at you or jump out. So that kind of leads this next question. Okay, if I know what my genre, well, what do I want that book to look like? Am I going to have a printed book, or will it be an ebook, or will it be both? How long is that book going to be? What size? Is it going to be thick, thin? What kind of trim size? That's kind of like the outside dimensions of the book. Is it going to be in paperback or hardcover, or both? Will I have photos or illustration? Welcome, Joyce. Nice to have you join us. Will there be photos or illustrations in it? And how long is it going to be? How thick? How many words is my book? And things, for example, like the weight and the quality of the paper is a factor for both the cost, and when I say quality, of what kind of a high quality or low quality book it looks like. So we all may remember when we were kids, they had these things called mass market paperback, which were kind of small paperbacks, and they were done with cheap paper, and the book was cheap. So what type of book is going to determine the how you want that book to look is going to determine a lot of things. I'm going to give you a few examples of some books here. I'm going to just grab them off my shelf. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing for a second here while I do this, because it's a little bit easier for me to make sure you're all seeing what I'm doing, what I'm holding up to you. We'll go back to the screen share in a minute. Okay, so I have here a typical paperback. It's all about the bike. This is like, must be 5 by 8.5 inches, 5.5 by 8.5. Very, very typical paperback book. Got, decent quality paper. It's got a nice kind of matte sort of cover on it, by matte, not shiny. And there's a reason, by the way, the books are that way. If they're shinier, they often can get scuffed a little more easily. Sometimes matte books scuff also, depends on that finish. But this is one very typical paperback, probably one of the most commonly types published books there are. I've got here a small book that someone did with CreateSpace, which was the pre-runner to Kindle Direct Publishing, which is Amazon. And so you can see it's longer in the base than it is on its height. And it's a book about, you can see it, called The Nature of Grief. It's like a little devotional workbook that a person who's grieving can work through. And it's got nice color photographs inside. This person did this Amazon CreateSpace very inexpensively. It's not a very big book. Then I've got here the Blue Zones Cookbook. By the way, we're hoping somehow to get Dan Beatner, the guy who kind of has led on the Blue Zones concept, to come to get set up. And this is a cookbook, and it's got what I mentioned about those glossy pages in there, because the color really jumps out. And cookbooks tend to be bigger. And so here's another thought about cookbooks. It is nice to have heavier paper, that glossy paper, because what do you want a cookbook to do when you're working with it? You want it to lay open. I used to be a book publisher, and our bread and butter, no pun intended, was cookbooks. And that was the thing we talked about constantly, was like, will that cookbook lay open, on the counter when you're cooking? And if it was too thick or the paper wasn't heavy enough, the cookbook wouldn't lay open. We say, no, that's not going to work for people. So there's a lot of things you have to think about in a book when you're doing a book that you might not think about otherwise. Here's a book I did, The Walk of a Lifetime. This is one of my favorite trim sizes. I think it's 5 1/4 by 8. And it's done print on demand. In other words, it's just printed one at a time. And if you come to my class on how to self-publish a book, I'll talk about probably use print on demand. So instead of there being a big print run with thousands of these in a warehouse somewhere, the Ingram Spark or Amazon just prints them one at a time as they're sold. They cost a little bit more per unit, but there's no big investment in those books. So those are just some examples. We're all very familiar with types of books. By the way, okay, the cookbook, by the way, is a hardcover, and that's another consideration. So if I want that book to lay open, it will lay open more easily if it's a hardcover than a soft cover. Any questions about any of those things I showed you so far? Okay, let me share a few more of these questions then with you. All right, we talked about what we want the book to look like. So that's something you got to ask yourself. And that's what I call modeling. And a lot of authors don't think about that. A lot of authors are creative people and they think they have to create something original. And I tell them, chances are there's nothing you're thinking of be doing that hasn't been done by somebody. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of books published every year, all sorts of designs and ideas. Just go find one that you like. Say, I really like the way this book looks. Like when I did my book, I said, I like that trim size of book. It's my favorite size. I like it because I can hold it in one hand like this easily. All right. That was one of my important considerations. It might sound silly, but if you're reading a book, I find it really easy to hold like that. So all sorts of things that people don't think about. So now, okay, we've decided what kind of genre we are, and then we've decided how we want that finished book to look. By the way, it could be an ebook or both. My book is an ebook or both. Most books published these days are both printed books and ebooks. It's not expensive to create it as an ebook. But the next question is, who is my audience? Who am I writing for? Okay, those are the people that are going to read your book. And I think it's the most important thing to identify. It helps decide how you write and how you market your book. Okay. When you're deciding or thinking about your audience, you need to be specific. You can't say everybody in the whole world needs to read this book, or I think everybody in the whole world will read this book. That won't work. Not everybody in the whole world reads the same books. You're lucky if there's 10,000 or 100,000 or 1 million people that will read your book, which is a very selective audience actually out of the whole world. For one thing, we don't all speak the same language. We're not all the same culture, even within language groups. And we have different educational levels. We have different belief systems. We have different interests. Those are just a few of the very simple things that determine your audience. When you're determining an audience, you need to think of the demographics. Okay, so what is the gender? What is the age? What is the nationality? What are the interests of my audience? You can, by the way, have more than one audience for a book. It doesn't have to be just one audience. So, and your audience, by the way, might be your family. I really encourage people, anyone over 60, you should be leaving behind some kind of memoir about your life, even if it's just a manuscript in a drawer that they find. So and I've written some things that have been just for my children, and those are written in a very particular way. For example, there's things I mentioned in there that my children will know about. I don't have to go into a lot of detail, but other people would be very quizzical. What is he talking about? I don't understand. I don't get that point that he's got there. I worked with some clients last year who had books that actually weren't even for sale. They used books for marketing their businesses, which I thought was a very clever idea. One guy was he's sort of an accountant. His specialty is being a bookkeeper for people who have family-run small businesses in construction. That was quite a niche he had. And as he kind of prospected with new customers, he gave them a copy of his book. He says, look, I've written a book about how to keep your books for your small business. Very simple. It's written in a way that hopefully you can understand. And so his clients would say, well, I'm impressed. This guy has written a book. So it says $9.99 in the back, and he would give it to them for free. So they felt that they got a gift, something of value. And it shows also he has some credibility as a person and as a businessman. So there's different reasons why someone might want to publish a book. So I did my book, The Walk of a Lifetime, 500 Miles on the Camino de Santiago. Anybody want to take a guess who I decided my audience was?
Travelers.
Travelers.
People who like to walk. And
People
ride
like to walk and hike. Yep. Exactly. Good guesses. Well, I was pretty specific about it. So I'll show you what, and that you're on the right track. So here's what I identified. I actually have decided I had 3 audiences. I started with 2, and then I discovered I had a third audience. So the first audience is people who have already walked the Camino de Santiago. So that's a 500-mile pilgrimage, and want to read about others' experience. So a lot of people walk it, they come back, and they want to just keep reading books about it. They relive it through others' experience, or they want to know how was that experience for someone else. And a lot of people who have walked it and have read my book said, it took me right back to that place you mentioned, that village in town. Yes, I can remember what it was like crossing over that mountain range or walking along the Meseta, the broad Spanish plain, without hardly any trees in the horizon. But also I knew there was an additional audience that I was writing for. So I was writing for people that had walked it, but I was also writing for people who would want to walk it someday. Okay. And I knew a lot of people because I had been one of those people that had wanted to walk it for 20 years. And I know the people who want to walk it want to know, what is that experience like? Now, I did a little research, and I knew that there were 30,000 English speakers who are walking it every year. Now, this is pre-COVID. Things have changed in the last year. We assume that someday lots more people will be walking. They're not this year. But the year I walked it in 2018, nearly 400,000 people arrived in Santiago, and 10%, a little less than 10% of those spoke English as a first language. So I knew I had a pretty big market, because that's 30,000 people every year walking it. And then there's millions that have walked it, and tens of thousands who want to walk it in the future. I got a pretty big audience. Now, as I was writing my book, I got something called beta readers. And those are just simply early readers of your book. They read an early version of the manuscript. And I had probably about 15 to 20 of those. And they read anywhere from 1 chapter to the entire book eventually. And I discovered, as I worked with these beta readers, that I had a third audience. And I call that audience North Americans over 55 who want to accomplish an adventure in their life. The reason I named that audience was because I had a lot of people. A lot of them were friends from school, or they were Facebook friends, or they were relatives. And they didn't particularly want to walk the Camino de Santiago, at least not before they read the book. But they knew I'd had an adventure in walking it. And so they were like, yeah, I'm over 55. My kids have grown. I feel successful or completed my career. Now I want to go focus on having an adventure. I want to read about your adventure. So that was feedback I got from quite a few people. So I decided I had that third audience. So you have to know who that audience or audiences are as you write your book. So for example, my book, I have some explanation of what the Camino is, some explanation of the history early on in the book. And then I explain things about the history, the geography, the culture as I walk along. But it's always understood that either the people who've been there will get the location I'm talking about, but more importantly, people who haven't been there will read about it and will give them an idea of what they're going to experience. Or people who've never even thought about it will get an idea, no, maybe I want to think about that. Okay, next question. So I got genre or type. What is it going to look like? Who's my audience? And as you're writing, you need to have that audience in mind. And when you ever work with an editor, that editor has to have that audience in mind. Some editors can't relate to an audience, so they may not do a very good job of editing, but most editors can figure out how to relate to an audience. The fourth question is, okay, well, how is my audience going to find out that I have this? This is what we know as discoverability. So it's no use having a book if people are not aware of it. Now, here's a little sobering statistic. Every year, this was from 2018, nearly 1.7 million new books were self-published in the United States. Just the United States, just self-published. So there were hundreds of thousands of other books published by traditional publishers. That's a lot of competition for your attention. So if you want to do a book, keep this in mind. Folks won't stumble upon your book. They have to be able to discover it. Discoverability requires promotion, engaging with readers. That could be like a question and answer session you have with them online or over Zoom, or in the olden days, we would do an author tour and we would meet with readers firsthand. It could mean and should mean doing advertising. I advertise for my book. It means being in front of your audience. It can also mean doing publicity. And it can also, all these things are kind of what we call marketing. All right. Publicity, engaging, promoting, advertising. Those are all parts of marketing. In other words, your book's got to stand out to your audience. You don't have to advertise to everyone. You don't have to promote to everyone, but you need to make sure your audience sees it. Okay, here's a type of discoverability that I'll bet we're all familiar with. This is the page. This is a page in Amazon. So I typed in the name of my book, and another book with a similar title came up, and I clicked on it, and I scrolled down the bottom of the page. When you select a product, in this case, I've got books, because books are probably one of the best examples of how Amazon has lots of data on a product. You scroll down there, and Amazon will tell you some other books that you may like based on the selection or choice of that book. And it will make that choice for various reasons. It will maybe make that choice because of things you typically search for. It might make that choice because a lot of people who have searched for this title also searched for these. Now, sometimes it even says that. Or it'll search it on, it'll recommend it to you based on your interests that you seem to have somewhere else. So the internet shares its information back and forth about us to all the different players, from Facebook to Google to Amazon. Also at the bottom, there's this thing called products related to this item. And you notice that word sponsored is right there. That means that someone is paid to have their book advertised. And they've decided that their book should be advertised when a term is used in searching, or they may say, I want my book advertised when someone searched for this particular book. So these are paid advertisements, actually, but this is all discoverability. This is how someone, and I am writing another book on bicycling. And I showed you this one here called It's All About the Bike. I think I just searched for the term bicycling, and this one popped up. And then down below, there were a whole bunch more books about biking. When I ordered in the end about 8 books on bicycling, I didn't just click order them all. I stopped and looked into each one. I looked about information about the author. I read some reviews of them. I said, yeah, I think that's a good book to get. So once we've decided all the previous 4 questions, and we've started thinking about marketing and promotion, the next question is, what kind of platform do I have to showcase my work or myself? All right. So the platform is the position from which you speak. It's a combination of credibility, experience, and promotion. And even if a person works with the traditional publisher will ask someone, well, what kind of an author platform do you have? And a lot of folks say, well, I don't have much of a platform. They'll say, well, you need to create a platform. Things often involved in a platform is a social media presence, like having a Facebook page about yourself as an author, about the book you've written. It also includes having a personal website. So, for example, I have a website my book is advertised there, so that if I can tell people about it, I can point them to the website to find out more about me or more about my book. I also write a blog there. I also do media interviews, and I have a whole sheet about media interviews that I've done, or places that someone can find out more information about me if they want to do a media interview. You also can have on an author platform samples of your written work. So, for example, my website, you can go get the first chapter of my book and read it. If you like it, great. If you didn't like it, you haven't lost anything, and I'm fine if a person didn't like my book. But it's a great way to advertise for the book. The person can get something for free. And here's a blog. I'll give you a link to Jane Friedman in my in the notes that come out after the class. She writes a great blog, but she has a great website about everything about publishing for authors, and especially for authors who might want to self-publish or work with a traditional publisher. It doesn't matter. She's got great information for you there, and she has a blog that she keeps up pretty regularly. Okay, the last question you want to ask, number 6, is what do I think a successful outcome is going to look like? And back when I was showing you the question about what is my audience, I worked with an author last year. He had done a book about addiction. It was a very well-written book. And I had asked him who his audience was, and he said the whole world. And I said, that's too big. Give me a better idea. And he said, okay, thought about it some more. All right, my audience are addicts or friends or families of addicts. I said, good. So now we know the information and the writing in your book needs to be targeted toward that audience. Well, then I asked him, okay, now after he identified his audience, I said, well, what is a successful outcome going to look like for you? What do you want to do? He goes, oh, I want to sell 10,000 copies my first year that it's out. Okay. Now, I happen to have known that since he was self-publishing, that is a difficult milestone to reach on your own if you're a self-published author. I also happen to know that he wasn't interested in doing any advertising, so I wasn't really sure how he was going to imagine that people would find out about his book, but he determined the outcome. So an outcome can be how many copies you think you'll sell, or sometimes it might just be copies you want to give away. I got a book here by my friend Cal Reddick, copies 95. It's called Enchantment and Despair, Montana Childhood, 1925 to 1937. Cal had a career as a college professor, and he was an early environmentalist, but he wrote this memoir about his first 12 years growing up on a farm in the Dust Bowl. And the farm failed, by the way, in Montana, and they had to move on to Oregon. And he wrote it because he wanted his children and other family members to know about his childhood, which is a great thing. But he also wanted to give them an idea how that childhood and his experience in the Dust Bowl on a failed farm had affected his choice of career and what he kind of poured his life into. And Cal just loves to give these books away. He gave me a copy. He self-published it through Friesen's Publishing, which is a place that authors can get self-published. But his outcome is that he wants to know, he'll get a box of 50, and he wants his outcome is, I want to give all 50 of those books away because I want people to read about that, my childhood. Other outcomes an author might want, and these are not all exclusive. You can have all of these outcomes if you want. For example, you might want to reach a lot of readers and have them contact you and get into conversation. So on my website, I have a form people can fill out, and it gets emailed to me, and then I exchange emails with them. And I love to hear from readers to know what they thought of the book. And for me, having a lot of readers contact is important. I don't have a number, but right now I want to know, am I still getting like one reader contacting me per week? An author might want to have an outcome as earning a living. Now, that's a very tough thing to do, to write a book to earn a living. It used to be easy. It always was hard, I should say, but it's now harder than it was in the past to earn a living as a writer. One of the outcomes that I was looking for in my book was I wanted to appear in this thing called, MRA's Books and Brews, WMRA's Books and Brews. That's our local national public radio station. And once a month, they have this event where they bring in authors. They might be local authors, they might not be. And they talk about their book. And if you are a member of the radio station and you bring your card to the brewery, they'll give you a free beer. And so I spoke to 250 people over 2 nights about my book and about walking the Camino de Santiago. And I love the experience. That was an outcome I actually wanted. I spent a lot of time promoting this book and what I could tell about it to WMRA, and I succeeded. So I got to appear 2 nights. So that was an outcome for me. I also set the goal that I wanted to sell 1,000 copies my first book, because 1,000 copies is a pretty good outcome for a self-published author. And I actually made that goal. I actually sold my first 1,000 copies before 10.5 months, and sold my next 1,000 copies in the next 5 months. So those are all outcomes that I set out for at the beginning. And outcomes that you've identified drive your strategy, and the strategy drives your actions. And every author should make their outcomes realistic and achievable. So my friend who that I work with, the author who wanted to sell 10,000 copies, I knew that that was neither a realistic nor an achievable outcome for him. And again, why? Well, the reason was because I knew he wasn't able or willing to do the type of promotion and advertising that he was going to need to do to reach his outcome. So that's what I always tell an author: identify, pardon me, your outcomes at the beginning, because if you don't identify them, you don't know what you're aiming at, and you won't know what your definition of success is. I'm going to stop sharing here in a minute. We'll have some more question and answer, but I will just mention a few classes that are related to this. I do have the class, How to Self-Publish a Book. And that should be coming up in the next weeks, plus a class called Everyone Has a Story to Tell, how to start a memoir. Really isn't how to write a memoir, how to start writing a memoir. What are the prompts that someone needs to start writing? And I give you some ideas. I mentioned here my next class is Bicycling, Fun and Fitness. Actually, my next class is this evening. We're going to do Foodie Wednesdays with Rick Steves. So if you've been watching any of the Rick Steves travel series, join us at 7:30 Eastern Daylight Time. So and I think you all have been with Get Set Up, and you know that you get an email like this at the end. You can give a review of the class and give me any feedback. I sure love to hear that. And I'm also want to encourage all of you or any of you to spread the word about learning with Get Set Up. Every day I meet somebody who says, a friend told me about this and I didn't know there are all these free classes, and now I'm taking all these free classes and I love it. So tell other friends about it. If you have an interest group you'd like to host, you can suggest that to us. And also, if you've got a class you think we should be doing, in the feedback, give us that idea. I get an idea about a class or two every week from other learners. So I really appreciate that. We do a partner with assisted care, senior living, government, and community organizations. So if you know some of them who would like to partner with us, also let us know that. So let me stop the share here and come up and ask if there are, and I see, thank you, Todd, our TA has put the email address in the chat if you want to get a copy of the recording after the class. What questions do you have based on what I shared with you so far?
I don't know if I have any questions, but I sure did like, but what you said, just leave something for your children. Within the last month, I said, I don't know if my grown kids really know me, and I just thought that is, something to leave for them. So maybe I don't know if it'd be what you would call a strategy, but just something to do to, so, they know me as in different roles as their mom, but they don't know me.
Yep. I know exactly what you're saying. And I've had one of my children say that, not about me my whole life, but he'll say that period of life between age 20 and 25, I don't really know anything about that period of your life. Tell me about it. I know about, afterward when I was around and I heard you talk about your childhood and high school and things, but what about that college to getting married and doing some of the crazy things you did? What about that period of life? So you're right. And just what you shared, Cheryl, is a minimum. I tell people, please leave that behind, because when we're gone, we won't have a chance to write it. And there are a million things I'd like to ask both of my parents, who've now been gone quite a few years. And I found something that my father had written after he died. And I would have loved to, he probably would have been embarrassed about it. They were essays he wrote in college, and he might've been embarrassed, but still I would have liked to ask him about those things. And I might've gotten some more information out of him. So I say at a minimum, we need to leave our children and family something about us so that they know, because for one thing, one of the best ways of developing self-understanding is understanding your family and the origins of your family.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I agree. I like that a lot. I'm glad.
Look for that class. Everyone has a story to tell. I think I'm doing it next week, and come and I give you some ideas how to start.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Um,
More questions?
it sounds like publishing is it's hard, overwhelming or hard, or you sound enthusiastic as a publisher, but for a writer to start out, is it like overwhelming? That I just, I can't believe about myself that I love to read so much. And I've taught writing classes and I know I'm capable to write, but I don't know what's, I guess, holding me back. And I think maybe it's the thought of publishing, because I know there's so many books out there. I don't know. I just,
Well, and I think what you said, Cheryl, is important because you said if your outcome is that you leave something for your children, that's an outcome you can
That's
achieve.
right.
What happens is a lot of people I know said, well, if it's going to look like that, I can't do it. I can't get there. And I tell them, well, it's easier than you think, but okay, that's all right. You don't have to do that. I've got a friend, and I share this in the class about writing memoirs. He's actually the father of my daughter-in-law. And he went to Thailand when he was 16 as an exchange student. And he had a great experience. He's only there for 3 months. It was a short exchange program. It was over a summer. And he, during the early months of the pandemic, he was stuck home. So he got out his journals and letters that he'd written during that time. And he decided he would publish them for his grandchildren. And he got out all the photos and other keepsakes that he had, postcards, stamps, anything that he'd kept from that period. And he made it into a beautiful little book. And right now it's just a PDF. It isn't even printed, but it could be printed in color. And he's just tickled that he's got something that really meant a lot to him for his children.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so easy for him to do. I mean, it was not as hard as he thought. And I find that a lot of folks don't know where to start. And part of what I tell them in that class about starting a memoir is you don't really have to figure out where to start. You just have to start writing. Doesn't matter where it is or what it's about, whatever strikes you. And I use examples of things like a photograph as a writing prompt. And I find I've got a couple examples of some photographs that have long stories attached to them that my children would never know the stories that could be attached to that photo unless I tell them. So, yeah. And by the way, when I wrote my book, I've loved writing all my life. I've worked, I published hundreds of authors. So I love the whole business. I've never thought I would never had any idea that I would write a book. Didn't really, because I didn't think I could sustain interest long enough to write a book. I'd worked with enough authors to know that it could be a several year project. I thought, nah, I don't think I can keep my interest on one topic that long. Well, I was wrong. I loved it so much that now I'm working on my second book, and I have books 3, 4, 5, and 6 in my head to write after that one's done.
That's interesting. I do know one thing. I'm fairly accomplished seamstress too. And for example, when my girls were doing prom dresses, I could have been hired on the spot, but I love to sew. And I didn't want to be hired because I didn't want to take away from the enjoyment of my hobby. So that's sort of in the way, that type of thing. I don't know, but I like to hear what you had to say there. So I don't know. It's like a roadblock. I don't know if it's a roadblock, but it's just something I'm afraid. I love to read so much, and I'm just afraid the writing will I don't know if that even makes any sense, get in the way of the takeaway from the reading, or
actually, I don't think it will, because I read to help me write. I have worked with someone who gave me a manuscript, a younger person, and I knew very well from reading it that he didn't read books. And I actually knew him well enough to know that he didn't read books. And his book was written like someone who doesn't read books, which means it was not very good. Yeah. His book read like someone who reads Facebook posts, which, by the way, could make an interesting book if that was what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
But you have to read. I always tell people to write, you have to read. And so actually I find that writing doesn't affect my interest in writing. In fact, it's almost made it more interesting, because I'm always looking at, I wonder why they structured this book that way. I'm not sure I would have done that, or like, oh, that's a brilliant structure for that book. Wow, what kind of ideas does that give me? So.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry to talk so much.
No, it's okay. That's why we have this class.
Yeah, you've given a lot of food for thought. I'm kind of excited now.
Good.
Yeah.
More questions from Joanne, or is it Sane, and Mary Lou?
I came late.
That's okay. Do you have any questions about anything I shared from what you heard?
I try to be back.
Well, we don't have to stick around longer if there's no more questions. I always want to make
I have a
myself yes,
question.
Joanne, go ahead.
My husband has published several books, and I just find that he gets so many people trying to contact him to invest in these ideas with this book. It just seems like there's a lot of fraud out there. Do you find that?
So maybe give me a little more detail. I'm not sure I fully understand why they're contacting him, because they read his book or they know about his book.
I think that they know he has published a book. I don't know if they know what his book is. He's gone to a lot of book conventions like Book Baby. We've gone to New York, Philadelphia. There's been one in San Antonio. And so your name gets on the list.
Yes. Okay.
And I think there's a lot of people that go on these lists and contact people, and they know what you want. You want to sell your book. So they come up with these ideas that just, I said, that's not a good idea. It's going to cost you too much money and you're not going to get the money back.
Yes, that is a very good point. There is lots of fraud out there, and there are lots of people. One of the things I talk about in my class, how to self-publish a book, is there's a company in New York that for anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000, but closer to $50,000, promises that they will make your book a New York Times bestseller. Now, I've been in publishing long enough to know that there is absolutely no guarantee that any book will become a New York Times bestseller. I mean, there's probably a formula that will make it more likely. You cannot guarantee an author that. You can't. And I mean, for one thing, you can't guarantee when a book is about to be released what might be happening in the world. So let's say you were a person who had written the greatest book ever written, and it was published on September 11th, 2001. Well, guess what? There was a lot of other stuff going on that day, and nobody paid any attention to it. Mm-hmm. So I see that stuff all the time, promising to, 6 easy steps. There are secrets that you can learn about how to market your book and sell better. That is true. But I always tell someone, when they promise something up front, be wary, because even when I've worked with authors, I always preface everything I say with the term, I can't promise you this, I can't promise you that. I can give you the suggestions or the best ideas. As a book publisher, two things surprised me all the time. One was books that I thought were going to do really well, and they didn't. And books that I had no idea would do well and really did. The bestseller of a book that I worked with in my 11 years with Mena Media, Herald Press, was a book I didn't even see coming. And it was by far the best-selling book. So, I just beware of anyone that promises everything. There's a price to everything. And I do take webinars and seminars about things from writing. I'm actually a student of writing. I also learn about book publicity and promotion and marketing. I do webinars for those, very reasonably priced webinars, but I also research a lot who is offering it and their background, and whether they have credibility, or whether their main credibility, or whether their main thing is just to make money off of me. I can believe it. I mean, actually, if you just search for something in the internet, like how to self-publish a book, if you were to put that in there and a bunch of sites popped up and you start popping in those. Well, next thing you know, you'll find those advertising to you when you're reading the news or something else. And yeah.
Pretty interesting stuff. I
Yeah.
like your enthusiasm. That's what too. So
Yeah.
I can
Well,
tell you good job.
I love publishing and writing. I love teaching about it. This was actually the first class I started teaching for Get Set Up, and I branched out into other things.
Really?
But I love the
Thank you.
topic, and I love working with authors and writers. And even if they're not creating a bestseller, I love working with them. So.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here, and
Yeah.
our time is about over. And please come and take some of these other classes, and maybe I'll see some of you tonight with Rick Steves and Foodie Wednesdays.
Oh, lot going on tonight. I have so many things scheduled for 7 o'clock. I can only do one at a time though. So gotta
No
make it
problem. There'll be
Happy
tomorrow. Tomorrow we do Art Thursdays in the afternoon, and Friday is history. And I think Friday's history is the Celtic land. So
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
goodbye, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.